That's sound and data.
And Mark Ballora on the line here. And what we're talking about, the reason why I really thought to reconnect with you was that I'm having trouble finding people working in the sonification area that have had success having scientists adopt their the research that they've done on a regular level. And I got the impression that at least your heart murmur things could possibly have gained some traction as a used technology in cardiology. Is that true at all, or am I?
No, they haven't gained traction. No, that's an unfinished project from my past. We got as far as proof of concept, but no, nobody's using it for anything.
Do you have any projects that you find have been accepted in any discipline as a useful item? I mean, Geiger counter level useful?
Well, I don't know. Geiger counter level is a pretty high order, but
yeah. Well, heading that way.
I mean, what changed? I think what changed was when I had the opportunity to work on the Rhythms of the Universe film that Mickey Hart was making with George Smoot.
Right.
And so that wasn't research, that was outreach and communications, but that was kind of a paradigm shift for me because it got me thinking, maybe trying to change the research environment all of a sudden with a brilliant new invention is unlikely to happen. I don't seem to be doing it, and neither is anybody else. And maybe it's better to focus on making cool educational components and then make it part of what kids get in their science classes at school so that they just grow up thinking of sound as a normal part of how you study science. And then by the time they grow up, they'll be the ones coming up with the killer apps and making the great discoveries with it.
Wow. Well,
so
that's really interesting.
That was, so that was work on that film and having some of my stuff in Mickey Hart's sound library that he's used on albums and on stage. It's not exactly a research milestone, but it was certainly I think it was an important step for sonification as a field, actually. I mean, to have the Grateful Dead community talking about sonification, there's a lot of people there. So that opened some doors for me, and it got it accepted at Penn State. So I started getting asked to give presentations at, there was a thing called Polar Day that they did each year, where they talked about climate issues relating to the polar areas. And so that brought some attention to it. And that led to an ongoing collaboration I've been doing with a meteorologist named Jenny Evans. And that's kind of done both things. She wanted me to create some sounds of tropical storm dynamics, which is what she works on. And she liked them. I added them to some satellite videos, like you can see online and like you see behind the weather people on television.
Right.
And she liked them. She wanted to take them to a conference in Korea, and she did. And it was twofold. One, it made the videos a lot more interesting to look at. It made them a lot more visceral. That's a word that a lot of people seem to say when they
so it was like multimodal, you're saying.
Exactly. It was multimodal. And it was like the difference between a silent movie and a movie with sound. It suddenly brings you into that world.
Right.
But she also, as a researcher, found it quite useful to be able to hear all of these simultaneous parameters. Like she said that she studies the phase space of tropical storms. That's one of her big contributions to the field. And usually when a storm gets more symmetrical, when it gets rounder, it's more intense. She'll tell you it's like when an ice skater pulls her arms in and spins faster. It's the same thing with a storm.
Right.
So she can see on a video when it's getting more symmetrical, but sometimes the storms would get more intense without getting more symmetrical, and she couldn't very well see that, but she could hear it in the data. So that was like, yes, golden spike. There
Oh
we
yeah,
have
yeah. There you go. Now,
information. And so that's everybody. Whenever I give talks on sonification and I show that one, everybody likes that one. Everybody, or if they ask me to give a talk, they say, "Oh, are you going to show the storms?"
yeah.
So I would consider that one to be successful. So we're looking to do more of that. And as far as an educational component, that strikes me as particularly promising.
Right.
I mean, so
right.
I visited someone.
But other meteorologists aren't like talking to her and saying, "Who is that guy? Let's do more of this," kind of thing.
Well, I visited. I visited an oceanographer at University of Rhode Island. I'll talk to you about that next.
Okay.
But when I was there, she said, "Oh, why don't you meet this meteorologist and show him your storm sonifications?" And so a fellow named Isaac Guinness.
Uh-huh.
And so I played them for him, and he said, this is really interesting because he works with disaster relief agencies and people who try to communicate the dangers of storms and take action when there are storms. And he said, the problem is that we researchers sometimes get our research done, and so we're real clear on everything, and so we think everybody else is too, and that's sometimes not the case.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes our graphs and our research just don't get the point across, and this could be really helpful. So he was having an open house, and he asked if he could include my sonifications in his open house. So that was kind of like somebody asking, "Who was that guy? Can I use his stuff?"
Yeah, right.
So we're thinking that this is a promising thing to make as part of an educational package, perhaps in concert with a science museum or something like that. It's a pretty easy case to make now that storm dynamics are something that it's important that we have a better understanding of. Ask anybody in Houston, and I think that they'll agree with me.
Or Puerto Rico.
Yeah. So it's a current and compelling issue that we need to know about, and so we're thinking that this would be a good way to help with that. It's interesting. A lot of scientists are realizing now that communications are about as important as research in terms of action being taken on their work.
Well,
that it's
with this change in what they think science is, it's a really bizarre time. I'm talking politically right now, but this is an interesting kind of thing that I've found. I mean, I've been really scouring the literature, looking for real instances of scientists really finding, like what you're saying, like the golden app or the magic bullet kind of thing. And I'm not finding it at all. But what I do find is this kind of thing, like PR outreach, like the Higgs boson stuff is the hugest case scenario of that. Someone just last night, Carla Scaletti did a sonification concert that I heard about. A friend of mine went to the concert and talked to her afterwards, and she was basically saying the same thing. And she's been involved in this stuff for as long as I've known about it. So.
Oh well, she's the one who named it. She's the one who. Actually, she didn't quite name it, but she's the one who contributed the term sonification to the auditory display community. Yeah, that was back in 1992.
Right.
We had the International Auditory Display Conference at Penn State last summer. I was the chair of it, and Carla was one of the keynotes.
Right. I tracked all that.
She's amazing. I love Carla.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I mean, I had Akima for a bunch of years at my studio at CSU East Bay back in the day. But anyway, and so I was in touch with her a lot then. And I've interviewed Greg Kramer. I think that source is very interesting. The other person I'm trying to get a hold of is Thomas Herman. I'm sure he was at that conference as well. Probably where most of the work is going on right now.
Yeah, and it's so the whole outreach thing is interesting. It's like a few years ago, I was spending time running around Penn State, rubbing sticks together and talking to people.
Right.
And it's like, so one time I met with, had a nice cordial coffee with Richard Alley, who's one of the world's leading climate scientists. You see him on CNN sometimes as a talking head and
Right.
that kind of thing. He's one of the people that everybody looks to. And so I'm talking to him, sound is data, a lot of possibilities. And he's kind of nodding and he's kind of cautiously interested, but he's not quite sure about it. And he's like, yeah, okay, we'll keep this in mind. And we parted on good terms. And it's one of these things that happens. I didn't hear from him.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, when I had this opportunity to present at Polar Day, and so we thought, well, we need to find somebody who can give us some data. Oh, Mark, why don't you go to Richard Alley's pizza lunch that he has on Friday with his graduate students? And I said, oh, yeah, that'd be great. And it seemed they didn't have anything on the agenda for that day. So I said, well, hey, I've got this 22-minute film, Rhythms of the Universe, that I worked on, this film by Mickey Hart and George Smoot. If you want, I could show that. And they were like, yeah, okay, sure. So I go there and I show this film. And Richard Alley is absolutely, doing backflips. He's like, wow, this is great. What a fantastic method of outreach. And I thought, wow, a few years in a good project really makes all the difference, doesn't it? And but it's interesting because there's still, he liked it and that was great. Some people see it right away, other people don't. There are sometimes people who come up to me like after I've given a talk or something and they have kind of this look like I'm a used car salesman or something. And so, well, what assessments have you collected on this? And
yeah, right. The whole chai kind of approach. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, for somebody coming from the arts, that's just an odd question. We don't deal with that, but people from the sciences do. And so I've gone from being kind of snarky and resistant to that to thinking, well, I really need to get something. It's just a question of what. Surely there are good ways to assess this, and so that's.
Boy, you're right in the zone that we've arrived at. Actually, completely. We're designing what we're trying to hope are standardized modules for types of sonification. And part of the reason why I remembered you had to do with that early heart work that you did, which I thought was very profoundly well thought out.
Right.
I encourage any listener to go check out what was that project called again? I don't have it right in front of me.
Well, it was heart rate variability.
Yeah, heart rate variability. And it was such a clear example of a way of looking at something that was familiar enough because it was like kind of stethoscopy, but it required the extra step of what computer technology has given to us in terms of the audio world, and it was done in a very artistic and craftsmanship way, which is another component of this whole thing that doesn't get discussed as much, in my opinion, is that you really do need musicians and composers because I was just rereading Curtis Rhodes' book, Electronic Music, A New Aesthetic, or Composing Electronic Music, A New Aesthetic. And he had this section where he's quoting Stockhausen from 1989 about a physicist, would just do an audification, I would call it, like a direct transfer, and say that was equivalent, but that a composer is needed in order to sort of bring it out and make it available on a sort of leitmotif level or something, or on a conceptual level,
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm gratified that you found those heart rate sonifications musical. That was some time ago, and let's say I've come a ways since then. So when I listen to that now, I kind of think, ugh, that's kind of crude. But it's not bad, but it's just I do better work than that now. But this,
I think we're all moving along.
What I wanted to tell you about was, that was the thing about getting to do things hard, musical first and foremost. I knew that I would not be having any deep intellectual discussions with him about sonification. I knew that he would want it to have integrity, but I also knew that when I uploaded stuff and he would download it, I would have like 2 seconds, and it would either grab him or it
Right.
wouldn't. And all the discussion in the world was not going to undo that first impression. So it having contributed to something where it really had to function at a musical level was, I think, a really important step.
Right.
And
I'm going to say,
so that
I'm going
kind
to
of
say,
plays into the whole assessment thing.
I'm going to say one thing, and that's just because the Skype dropped out when you said the name Mickey Hart. So in case the listener didn't hear that this project was with a former Grateful Dead drummer Mickey Hart, and when I heard you were working with him, I had to tell this story. I mean, the thing is, I grew up in San Carlos, California, and there was Mickey Hart's Drum World, which was owned by Mickey Hart's father. And I bought my first 12-string guitar from Mickey Hart when he was working at his father's store.
Whoa!
So I just thought, wow, well, that's weird, you know.
We really are distant relatives. Then,
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I thought it was a colorful anecdote to throw in, you know. Anyway,
Indeed.
yeah.
Well, so this whole issue of communications and so forth has been. I mean, different people are starting to see this. So what came out of the work with Jenny Evans and the other work I got to do at Penn State was this opportunity to go to they call it a conference, but it was more like a workshop think tank by the Keck Futures Initiative.
Oh yeah, I saw that
actually a year ago. Yeah, so their whole idea was to choose an important scientific theme and then bring people together from different disciplines to brainstorm on how they might approach it. So last year it was the deep blue ocean. And so you applied online. My associate dean found it and said, "Hey, Mark, does this sound interesting to you?" And I was like, "Oh boy, does it?" So I applied online, and by that time I had enough of a track record that I made a convincing enough case that they accepted me. So I went there, and I met some people who found this interesting. So among them was an oceanographer named Karen Wishner. She's at University of Rhode Island.
Right.
And she thought, well, yeah, this could be pretty cool in introductory oceanography classes when I'm presenting graphs of things to students who are new to this. What if we played them music or something musical? How would that affect them? And I'm like, yes, this is what I need. This is a whole class of undergraduates who are being exposed to science through sound. And then if we can get a science educator involved and actually gauge how effective that is, that would be really cool. So we applied for a NACFE seed grant and we got it, which has been great. That's like, a big foundation saying, here's a bunch of money, go do some sonifications. And I'm like, wow, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's so that's why I was in University of Rhode Island a little while ago. That's where I met Isaac Guinness, who I was telling you about.
Right, I got it.
But
yeah.
In the fall, that's what we're going to be doing. We went from talking about this one module that would be maybe a couple of classes where they show this one particular graph that illustrates the types of little sea creatures you find at different depths. And I thought that's what we were going to work on. But then they started saying, well, gee, we could do your storms too. And we could do things like the Keeling curve for climate change, because this is an introductory earth science class. And we could do stuff all through the term. And I'm like, oh, really? So that would be like a whole current, sorry, pardon the pun, but a whole current in this class is playing stuff for these introductory students.
Okay, now this takes me to a technical question. For each of the sonifications that you just mentioned, are you using the same technique that's a time series representation of like a Cartesian graph, or are you using different techniques for each of those?
Well, a lot of them are. The one where she's showing people the populations of different sea critters at different depths is not a time domain graph. That's she's plotting depth on one axis, and then she's plotting the populations of different creatures on another axis.
Oh,
So
I
when
see.
you have something like that, then you say, okay, so what is my time component going to be? So maybe what I need is a sound that sounds like we're going underwater. I need a sound to represent increasing depth levels.
Yeah.
And then as we go down, so it's like the sound of an elevator going down,
Like a
so to speak.
data narrative kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
Exactly.
right, yeah.
So as
I mean,
we,
they have
as
that
we,
in visualization. That's a common theme in the training on visualization, and we're thinking of these training modules for the types of sonification modules that we're developing. One of which is the Cartesian graph one, you know. But so this is really helpful to you know, listen to your experience about it, and it confirms what we're sort of assuming. So that's great.
Yeah, but so I think that's going to be real promising. That will give me a chance to show definitively that this is a good thing.
Right.
And she's not only, but also for her readers, that they may be able to hear some things by listening to them in this way. So that's what's so important, is to have buy-in from an important researcher like that, from somebody who really wants to work with you and
Right.
who will through it with you. I mean, when I worked with Jenny Evans, it took me, maybe 3 or 4 iterations to get the storm sonification into a form that she liked. But the fact that she was willing to say, well, okay, I see what you're doing, but could you change this? All right, now that you've done that, maybe you could change this. And it wasn't like some people that I've worked with where it's like, well, okay, Mark, let me see what you got. It's, oh, yeah, well, okay, that's not quite it, but thanks so much. And it's like, the performing monkey didn't quite come through for you on that one, damn it. But somebody who will really work with you and develop something, who's committed enough to it and who sees the potential in it, that they want to make it work. That's what makes all the difference. So I would say that Jenny Evans wanting to continue working with me and Karen Wishner wanting to work with me, I would call those, these are the bases of clinical success of sonification, just to make sure I answer the very first question that you asked me.
Because I'm going through the same experience. We got a similar type of grant, a DARPA grant for neuroscience, and I'm working with this guy, Guggen Wig, who's a neuroscientist, and he's very excited about, we've done several iterations with him, and that's really is the key, I think, maybe, is that you have to get that kind of buy-in, and it also sort of mutual respect, which is hard to develop, because I and this is a little blunt and frank, but I think a lot of scientists don't have this level of respect for the sort of depth of craftsmanship it really does take, and sort of, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I do, and that's it's crossing that divide, and I think that's coming down.
Right.
The science. What I'm finding, at least from my side of the fence, is that scientists more and more are acknowledging the importance of the arts in helping them put their word out, and so the division between the artsy people and the sciencey people are kind of breaking down, which I think is healthy. It kind of takes us back a few hundred years to the age of the natural philosopher, where you weren't just a physicist or a violinist, but you were a Renaissance person who did all kinds of things, and each informed the other.
Well, that's the classic Leonardo model,
Exactly. Yeah, I think that we're coming back to that. The fact that NACFE, the Keck Futures Initiative, would have these annual conferences and make sure that they had artists there, right? And that they would say, yeah, this proposal between a sonification guy and an oceanographer sounds great. Here's $50,000.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing that happened with this DARPA deal. I mean, they insisted that we have a performance connected to the research we were doing with the neuroscientists, which is like, what, But
that's great.
Yeah, so we did this thing in Seattle. And I've heard the same thing in the EU as a big science art initiative. Of course, I'm working with Roger Molina, who's kind of a linchpin in this kind of area. So he hears about all this stuff. So I get a kind of first row seat on the the way it's flowing. But I think your approach is the thing, and we have to refine the way that with the expectations that we have for the work, and also the way of doing assessments, as you were talking about before, and just in general, kind of try to understand why this hasn't been as successful as we intuit it should be. I think as where I'm coming at. I mean, like, why isn't there a new Geiger counter that's based on data, or what we were calling a data stethoscope?
Yeah. Well, it's. It's interesting. Carla Scaletti, when she gave her keynote at ICAD, and she showed some of these first line and areographs that William Playfair produced in the 1780s. And that's regarded by many as the birth of visualization.
Right. I know what you're talking about, actually. Yeah.
And we look at these now, and it's just second nature to us. It's like, oh yeah. But she said, there were 10 pages of explanation that went along with that. That's what was required to explain it the first time anybody ever saw this. They didn't just immediately look at this and go, oh, yeah, that tells me everything I need to know.
Yeah, we're running into this training problem. I mean, clearly, because we're trying different types of sonification. And, every time you do something in a different way, you have to sort of give it a context. Even though we, as the creators, totally understand it, that doesn't mean anybody gets what the hell we're doing. It's like.
Well, yeah. Now you're talking like Isaac Guinness did, the meteorologist. It's like, yeah, I've done all my research, so why don't you get it?
Yeah, right.
And so that's why I think it's so important. That's why I'm presently more interested in working in the educational domain, in exposing kids to this and making this just a part of their science world, so that it's not an unusual novelty, but it's just part of what you do. Well, you listen to graphs, of course you do.
In our setup, it's certainly one of our use cases, which is a K-12 advanced science curriculum that we're contributing sonification research to in the context of, it's just identical to the use case you're talking about. So, and it probably is the richest. It's the one we've had the most success with, that's for sure.
With kids?
Yeah, so far. I mean, certainly when we give a demo at the Art Science Lab, the things that work in terms of demonstrating the idea of what sonification is go over the best in that kind of context,
Well, you should present that at ICAD.
Yeah.
And give us put the numbers in.
Yeah.
Get people who do the numbers, who know how to do that, or maybe you know how to do that. I don't know.
No. That's one of the things. I mean, this is what's great with working with Roger. He's the one who's working on the assessment part of it, which is great. You can only do so much. And so we're trying to develop a kind of a workflow. And I'll talk to you some more offline when we're not doing a podcast. But I think we've covered enough for now. Everybody's brain is going to start hurting here pretty soon.
Oh, sorry about that,
No,
folks.
no, it's fantastic. I'm just saying I try to keep these down to about a half an hour, and we just hit the half-hour mark. So I'm gonna, the thing is, I'll call you again, and we'll talk some more, like in maybe 4 or 5 months, and see. Let's see, you're going to do this next fall? Is that what you're saying?
No, this spring.
This spring. Okay, so maybe early summer, I'll give you another ring, and we can get an update on your success and that kind of thing. I plan for this to be an ongoing thing.
Great.
In terms of the Sound and Data channel. And likewise, if you come across anyone that you would like to do a similar sort of interview and conversation with, please let me know, and we can include you as a host on the same channel, because we're trying to build this up and get sort of a dialogue going about this kind of very specific area of the threshold between, I guess, the sonification application creation and the art side as well. I mean, because there's just a ton of work that's been done that is, well, I don't know have you seen this guy Martin Curie's YouTube about sonification on YouTube? By any chance? It's a little snarky, but it's interesting, and he makes some really good points. Actually, earlier today I was trying to reach him. He has twin baby boys, and I guess something happened. He didn't get a hold of me, but I'm also interviewing him because his point of view is really on point in a way, Yeah. But he's sort of. I think your approach is much more positive, because it's true that we have to introduce these ideas of what sonification is into the culture before we can expect there to be like a broader usage, I think.
Yeah, that it's, I just accepted that it would take time, that it wouldn't happen overnight, like flipping on a light switch.
Right. Right.
And when I let myself off the hook like that and just said, well, if my third grader can grow up thinking that this is normal, and by the time he's my age, take the long view, look ahead 30, 40 years, and hope that by then it has an effect. That
Well, like
gives me
Carla,
a lot less pressure.
yeah, like Carlo Scoletti's example of what was going on with the early visualization. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt point. Anyway, okay, so I guess that's it for now. I'm going to stop the recording, but let's just keep talking for a second after that, okay?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Mark Ballora just came up with some amazing points on this whole area, and so we'll be getting back to him next spring.
Assess sound and data.